Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, as always, Phil Brand, joined with my regular co-host here, James Rhodes. James, how you doing, mate?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
Well, good, all good. Promise me bring the show back on a Monday. Let's see if I can upload the correct podcast after this last week. Um, for those of you who are wondering, last week you rarely speak about your greatest victories, but the last 15 minutes they showed professional composure on our podcast that only the very best can accomplish, which may have explained why I made an error in uploading an incorrect podcast. But nature called the last 15 minutes. um, I somehow just about kept it together, if you know what I mean. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, United v Fulham this weekend, horrendous performance. Uh, James, it's hard to find a positive. It was a terrible,
Yeah.
terrible performance. At the time of recording this podcast, the INEOS deal just got announced right after it, so we'll cover that, of course, in some of Ratcliffe's comments. But we must first start with the game at the weekend. Obviously, Ten Hag unlucky prior to the game with the injury to Hoyland. He's lost key transformative players. I completely accept that. But that Fulham performance, there's been far too many of them.
Yeah, for sure. And they're doing a whole lot of analysis on the Monday Night Football Sky show, like right now as we speak. A lot of things flying around on Twitter and whatnot about all of that, talking from Jamie Carragher and other people who really do understand the game quite well. Um, my concern was that I know we spoke about this at length, and we didn't know Hoyland would be injured at the time of recording the last one ahead of this Fulham game. But that, my concerns with our winning kind of run since Aston Villa in December were that what was working was Hoyland, Garnacho, and Rashford. And I don't think much else was really working. I know Kobbie Mainoo has been doing a great job to be clear as an individual. But in terms of what was working in this team, that was really it. I think between the three of them, something like 18, 19 goals and assists over that 7-8 game stretch, with 5 or 6 for each, 7 for Hoyland and goals. Hoyland's out. Both Rashford and Garnacho changed positions, which I thought was a mistake in game. Instead of keeping at least that fluidity, the two of them in the spots, they've been doing pretty well. I think both struggled for different reasons in the game. I thought that I didn't think Forsum was bad or anything. I just didn't think he was very impactful, which you wouldn't expect him to do too much, in that kind of situation. I thought Ahmad was quite a bit better when he came on for the brief bit that he did.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I don't know what else to say. I mean,
Look,
there wasn't really much, by way of like.
There's a few things that deserve to be said. First of all, United squad is way too thin. And it's not equipped to deal with key players missing. I accept that. Anthony, of course, I think it was very telling that he played Amari Forson rather than. I don't know if that was more because he didn't trust Anthony or because he didn't want to play Rashford down the middle or whatever. Why did he want to do that? But when you look at United miss a couple of key players, they don't have the depth to deal with it. Now Fulham, I think, they were one away game all season.
Yeah, well, and they were missing 3 starters, the same as we were.
So that's fine if you want to excuse not beating Man City. That's fine if you want to excuse not beating Liverpool. And I'm not saying you have a right to win every game in the Premier League. You don't. But they were so bad, and I think one of the things that bothered me was after the game when Ten Hag said United deserved to win. I can accept you saying you look at the bigger picture and all that. I get that. But you have to say what you just saw. And I understand he doesn't want to criticize the players because he feels that's not getting the correct response. But that performance was disgraceful. And I don't think James, first of all, he would never get away with another run like the one he's just had. Right? And I don't think he's got many more of these left. The question any of us have to be asking themselves is this. If we had no manager, would we hire Eric Ten Hag? That's it. Not what has he done or anything. Based on what we know right now with Eric Ten Hag, I think that if they took over United and they didn't have a manager, they wouldn't appoint Ten Hag. That doesn't mean they won't keep him, but you can see United doing something like this against City, and that being the end. I don't think he would survive another bad defeat, another bad performance. I really sense that. I mean, we'll talk about INEOS' comments last week, but they certainly weren't indicative of people that were completely behind him.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, and Harry Maguire after the game said they didn't do well enough to win the game. So, in contrast to Ten Hag's comments that they should have won it, Harry said they didn't do enough over the 90 minutes to win the game, and I think that is certainly a more accurate assessment. I think Fulham were the better team for the vast
Mhm.
majority of the game.
Mhm.
I think that the teams United have played against that they've beat have been better than them in most games recently, outside of a few moments. But yeah, it is exactly that point that I've tried to make about the Ten Hag job, the manager position is it's not nobody's sticking around by default at United. That's not how it works under INEOS, right? When we're
Mhm.
talking about the CEO, Richard Arnold was not going to remain just because he was the CEO. John Marta's not staying as the director of football just because he was there. And Eric Ten Hag won't stay as manager just because he's there. They would
Mhm.
have to decide that he is the right person
Yeah.
to move forward with for the long haul. And the issue you have with that is that it's not the same thing if you struggle next year to say like he's got 1 year left on his contract, let's give him another chance for another year. I don't think that is enough. It
Yeah. Oh,
isn't the same to struggle. It isn't the same for Eric Ten Hag to struggle next season in his third season as it would be for a new manager to have some growing pains. If in November next year Eric Ten Hag is still in the job and they're struggling, that's a real problem for INEOS because then they have to sack him. They
that's a
have to.
possibility.
And that it would be a disaster for their first season in charge of the club to have to do that. If they have a new guy in and he's struggling in November, it's okay. It's acceptable. It's to be expected that there's going to be a bit of a growing pains, and as any manager will get time to implement things. The bar is going to have to be way higher for Eric Ten Hag next year. But what that means is they're going to have to be convinced. And so, speaking specifically on this game, when you're watching United play, are they convincing that there are ideas, that there is enough coaching, that there's enough going into this, regardless of the quality of the personnel, to be confident this is your man, not for 1 year, but for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years moving forward. And I think that is definitely the
Yeah.
issue at hand.
I think in his defense, there's a couple of things I would say in his defense. The squad, the team that started against Fulham at the weekend consisted of 2 players that he had signed,
Yep.
which is, I don't know whether that is an indication of the concern that United have with his training methods, because once again, we've got other players missing due to muscle injuries. Some of those have been sent, like Mason Mount situations, ridiculous. Malacia situations, ridiculous. The Hoyland situation is a concern because, I'm leaving out major details here, but I've grew up watching football. I don't remember players getting this many injuries, non-contact injuries. You'd have a couple of forward squads were much smaller in the 90s. I know they weren't playing quite as many games, but they were playing a lot of games.
Yeah.
We're supposed to have improvements in sports science and everything, and yet you would have players that almost this would happen to once or twice a year. United have it once or twice every 2 months, and so the squad depth isn't good enough. It's not entirely his squad, I accept that, but there are certain things that make hard reading. One, the number of shots United are conceding in a game because
Yeah.
it shows they're wide open. And two, the stat that Arsenal have scored already in February half as many goals than what United have scored all season. Look, that to me is, I know stats don't always give a whole story, but those are awful indictments. I'm sorry, those are really
Yeah.
hard reading.
They are. It was something like in the last 4 games conceded as many shots as half of Man City's season as a whole, being the team. And it's
Yes.
at both ends, these problems occurring. Um, you know, again, like you said, the depth is an issue, the personnel is an issue, but we're talking about Fulham, at home.
Mm. Yeah.
They haven't beat us since 2009 anywhere, one away win in all this time. Those excuses go out the window. If we were battering them, controlling the game, dominating, but failed to find that scoring edge without
Hmm.
Rasmus Højlund, that would be different. We've had games like that over the years. We
Yep.
will always have games like that over the years where you just can't find a way through, but you're there. And that's a different story than what we're dealing with, where we look regularly like the plucky underdogs who might be lucky to snag a goal. And so, yeah, it's just and I don't think I don't think it comes down to obviously there's going to be doubts, there's going to be concerns, there's going to be things like that among players. I don't think it comes down to a lack of motivation or effort or things like that from the players in
Hmm.
general. When you look at the run over the last 8-9 games where they have won a lot of games, we were just talking about that the mentality looked a lot better. They had comebacks against teams on multiple occasions, setbacks, comeback against Aston Villa, going away there, winning, Newport, even though they let them get back right level, which was kind of ridiculous. They didn't collapse afterwards. Wolves going back again after conceding again and again and again and coming back and scoring and winning a game 4-3. That I don't think it's a mentality problem. It's a setup problem, it's a quality problem, and it's a depth problem, and so much more. It's all of those, of course, but I don't want to sit and say that players don't want to win or nobody's on this. That there's some major other thing going on to explain it all away, except that it's just not working at the moment.
Look, I think what I was encouraged to hear Jim Ratcliffe say was no manager succeeded here
Yep.
because of
Yep.
the environment, the atmosphere, which is 100% the case, right? Um, I think that there's very good reasons for why United managers fail. And just because INEOS took over a month ago doesn't mean Ten Hag's experiencing the benefits of all they have to bring.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if Ten Hag gets sacked, another manager comes in, he will have inherited a much better situation than the one Ten Hag did and will be given a much better chance at succeeding than Ten Hag did. There's no question about that. But the thing for me is Champions League is obviously very important to United. They need to qualify for that for revenue purposes. And when I look at the criticisms that are being leveled at Ten Hag, I think you can isolate some of those outside of some of the issues you have at United, like the setup. Okay,
Yeah.
yes, you should still be able to put a team on the field that isn't that wide open. And the gaps between the defense, the midfield, and the forwards are massive. And Eric Ten Hag obviously knows a lot more about football than me. I don't know what he's trying to do. And I'm sure he has a reason for playing this way. But I'm looking at that and I'm going, there's just been so many consistent statistics throughout each game that keep repeating themselves. Where United score and then they concede a few minutes later, just like this, they equalize in the 89th minute. I know they're pushing for the second goal they concede. How many games have they lost or conceded goals, key goals, in the last 6-7 minutes? I mean, it happened at Arsenal, happened to Wolves. They bailed themselves out. It happens a lot. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, these are things that you should be able to fix. And even if you should be able to put 11 players on the field from Manchester United that can play much better than that against Fulham. And I agree, I don't think it's a mentality issue. I think that one, they're not good enough, but two, I just think that they don't look set up properly.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, they clearly were not trying when they were heavily pushing for that second goal to concede against Fulham. They were not dropping off. They were not collapsing. They were not
Mhm.
going there. It just wasn't right, and it just hasn't been. And I think one of the main points they pointed out in the setup is there's this attempt to play a high press and a deep line, which is what you're talking about with these midfield gaps where the pitch is huge all the time. It's huge. And of course, that can be a contributing factor to muscle injuries and things like that too. When
Well,
your distances are so big between
yeah.
between the lines, it's everybody's covering more ground.
In his slight defense, James, one thing I will say is this is the second January in a row where United needed to spend and really didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And last January has to bring in Weghorst on loan. They need another striker in January, plainly, right? Because this was always the issue. What if Hoyland gets injured? And this is a kid, remember, for the first couple of months of the season, couldn't play 2 games in a week. What do you reduce to? Amari Forson. I mean, when you look at the fact that United are sitting there with really no fit central striker, one fit fullback at the club, that is an absolute disgrace for a club this size. It's just disgraceful. I mean, it is just an awful indictment on everyone at Manchester United that has gone before them, that the club is in that bad a position and can't be FFP compliant, because it speaks to so much ineptitude. That's, in that sense, I feel for him. I mean, you look at the depth of Chelsea, City, all that. I mean, it's night and day.
Yeah.
But still, I think for Ten Hag and any other top club, he would not be there. And I know United have their own issues, but we said something on this show recently, and it's since proven to be a lot of top managers want that job now. With INEOS being there now, we were saying this a few weeks ago, this is going to be one of the things that will change, is other top managers will look at United and say, attractive proposition, and that's only going to increase the pressure on Ten Hag.
It will, and there's a lot of clubs that are looking for managers, but when you look at their positions, if you go to Bayern to replace Thomas Tuchel, if you're not winning Champions League, you're going to be a failure at Bayern right now. It's a lot of pressure because they perennially win the league outside of this season. It's, for the most part, that's difficult. That's a difficult bar to step into for any manager. If you go to Liverpool, you're following up on their potentially greatest, or at least one of their greatest managers, but certainly their greatest in most current fans' memory, right, of Liverpool. That's what you're dealing with there. You're following up on that. And a revival and potentially even another title-winning season, or a multiple trophy-winning season. I mean, they're in all 4 competitions still right now, right? After winning the League Cup on Sunday. So that is a tough job to fill for anybody. And then, you also have the simple fact that Xabi Alonso being a Liverpool kind of legend, it's almost tailor-made for him if he wants it. But, that means when you look at all these jobs available at United, you have an extremely underperforming. I mean, it's a dream for a manager who's confident that they know what they're doing. It is perfect because the expectations, not that they aren't high, they're always high, but how it's been is at the bottom. It's been awful. And you have this new group coming that's actually, doing things and going to appoint things, and in a lot of ways going to absolve you of a lot of responsibility that the other managers did not get absolved of, including Ten Hag when you're talking about transfers and things like that and making bad calls. The next manager of United, if it's not Ten Hag next season, will not be blamed for how we make transfers if one doesn't go right. They will not be given any responsibility in a respect. There's always some, but they will not be treated the same way by fans, media, etc., in terms of how they buy, how they sell, what they're doing, because they won't have that pressure on them. It is a dream in a lot of ways for many managers, especially the kind of modern day manager.
Well, Ratcliffe has said that it's ridiculous that the manager reports to the owner.
Yeah.
Right? That he needs to report to the CEO, the basically the guy that runs the football department, which would be Barada, I would imagine, and not Dan Ashworth. So,
and the people under him,
So, understanding the pyramid would be Dan Ashworth, would be Barada, then Ashworth on down. So, Ten Hag would be responsible to Barada, who technically can't take over to the summer, but as we all know, that's not practical. I'm sure he's influencing stuff behind the scenes, and it's not like this is his first job in football, so we'd be well versed on what the top managers are. I'm sure at City they had to consider what would happen if Guardiola got hit by a bus tomorrow. Another thing that I thought was interesting from INEOS, from Ratcliffe, was the statement that we have our ideas of how football should be played, and it was essentially saying Ten Hag either has to adjust to that or he leaves, right?
Correct.
And so that's obviously going to shape how United recruit, which will be different from how Ten Hag recruits. So it's great that they're putting a very clear reporting structure in place, that everything's derivative from Barada down. And I look at that and I'm thinking, if I was Ten Hag, that would concern me, because Jim Ratcliffe could have easily come out and said something that was extremely supportive of Ten Hag, and he didn't. He didn't. I mean, people are trying to interpret his words, but he's not stupid, right? So he didn't criticize him, but he didn't really support him. And if I was Ten Hag and that was my new boss, that would concern me a bit. So I look at that and I'm thinking, if they did get rid of Ten Hag, you would have to imagine Barada would be key to replacing him. Is that something they want to do before Dan Ashworth gets there? Is that something that they want to do now? I would find it hard to believe that Dan Ashworth isn't also influencing decisions at United in some point from his garden.
Yeah, he's just gardening. He's got one plant that says, Ten Hag on it, and they're waiting to see if he's going to pull it out of the ground or keep it where it is at the moment, But but no, what your point on what Sir Jim Ratcliffe said is actually, I think, very it'd be very easy. I don't think under any circumstances Sir Jim would have said something negative about Ten Hag, right? Would have said, "Oh, are you confident in the manager?" He's not going to say no. Mid-season, the guy's on the job. He's not going to say no.
But to
It
me,
would be very easy to say yes, though.
if he doesn't say yes, he says no.
Exactly. Well, that's the point, right? Very easily, he could say, "Yeah, Ten Hag's our guy. We're going to back him. We're going to give him what he needs, and he's going to, align with us to move forward at this club to the future." Instead, he says it's not about the manager.
Mm-hmm.
It is telling. It is telling into the way that they view things, which is, no, they don't think he's the guy right now, probably. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. I think it's fairly clear that he is not the guy. He's interviewing. And I think that the time of that interview is almost up, because, as we've discussed a few times, and as is the case, you cannot wait until June to look at the manager and decide what you're going to do next year. If it's Ten Hag, you need to decide in March, because you're going to have to be recruiting and doing the things you need to do.
Exactly.
If it's not Ten Hag, you're going to have to decide in March.
I agree.
Because you're going to have to be doing these things. So this interview, and I think the problem Ten Hag has is, you have Man City next weekend.
Yep.
You just lost to Fulham. I don't think he has time to change the outcome of his interview by much. You know what I mean? I think it's they're going to have to be making these decisions now. And would you say he's done enough? Yeah, if I was him, I'd be a bit concerned at this point in time, that I don't think I've done enough to convince them that I'm the guy moving forward. Because again, as I say, the view is not, give him a chance next year and maybe we'll have to sack him in November. That cannot happen. It can't.
Exactly.
It would be the absolute zero chance that happens. They will not take him into next season without confidence that he's the guy moving forward.
Next season starts March, James.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, this is...
that's true. And then that's what most of the big clubs have talked about. Yeah.
So they have to decide now.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, if you need to get, especially after what Ratcliffe said about knocking City off their perch, if you need to go to City and they get beaten comfortably, I think that's it. I just don't see any way else survive it. And United fans cannot take another hiding against City.
Yeah.
And with no Hoyland, no Martinez, no Shaw, what else do you expect? I mean, I certainly am not looking forward to this game.
Yeah, me neither.
I think it may be one of those last moments that you have to experience before, before there's real change. And I think because I say this as someone that's defended him vociferously, I didn't want to just turn on him. I thought, he'd done a good job last season. He deserves some grace. But we're sitting here in February, and that performance against Fulham is plagued them all season.
Yeah. I think I'd asked some people I speak with recently, just from an opinion standpoint, because I'm really, I really don't want to act as if, just because we have an audience or people who listen or we do this kind of stuff, act as if I know better than anybody, especially the people who are making the decisions, right?
Mhm.
And so I've been really curious to say, because things are just my opinion, but I feel as though the question would be asked as this, really simply. Right now, if you were to look at it, aside from things like, well, managers need time, or this manager took 2 years to get there, this manager took 3, things like that. I asked if you can really give a solid reason to say what Ten Hag is doing, and I mean really doing as a manager, that would tell you he's the right guy for it. And it's hard to find an answer to that question. And I think that's the same problem that he'll have when INEOS are asking those same questions. What are you doing that would tell us you're the right guy moving forward? And we're not seeing much evidence of that.
I I think the other thing is for him to continue, they have to have unshakable belief in him,
Yeah.
unshakable confidence. They have to
Yeah.
say, okay, we're going to support you this summer. We're going to be 100% behind you. But if they say that in March, maybe by May, United have had another stinking run where they've lost. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't back out on that. And that's why I'm saying I feel like there's just too much uncertainty about him
Yeah.
where it's probably not fair, but at this level, it's not about fair. But I just feel there's going to be enough sufficient doubt for any of us to say we just cannot throw everything in with him because
Right.
given United the FFP situation, can they afford to get this wrong?
Right.
Or can they really afford to give Ten Hag a bunch of money this summer, then turn around in November and know exactly what you knew in February and say, this didn't work? Because what you've got now, James, is you've got people at Old Trafford who will be judged on these decisions.
Yeah.
So if they get this wrong from Brailsford, and the rest of this team, Barada, they get this wrong, they're going to own this decision. In the past, United, executives never owned that decision. If it was wrong,
Yep.
it's the manager's fault, it's not our fault. But that's not the
Yep.
case anymore. So now you've got people at the football club who are going to be judged on these decisions. And when you have people that are also risking their reputation on this decision, I think that's where, you just won't get the same rope at United as you always did. And I know there's people that are split on this about whether Ten Hag should continue or not. But and personally, I would love nothing more for him to continue and get it right. And United to win trophies and play attractive football. But I just feel that the fact that we're 18 months in and United are still 3 or 4 players away from completely falling apart if they lose them. They lose Martinez, they lose Manu, they lose their left back, they lose their central striker. What have you got left?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. And I'm willing to accept whatever it is that INEOS decide, because they're going to do the things for the right reasons, and they're going to have the right people making that decision. And that's really fine with me at the end of the day, to go with. I mean, if they decided he was the guy and they went with it, then I'd have a lot of belief they'd turn it around, frankly, despite all my
Mm-hmm.
own doubts and concerns, because I know they know what they're doing. I don't have that kind of hubris to assume that, despite, I don't think I know nothing. I don't think that my intuition tends to be off too often, but I'm certainly not anywhere close to the expert or an expert on this type of thing. So I guess we'll see. But I think that the biggest takeaway is that if you're looking at it now, that decision will be made soon by them.
Okay.
And at the moment, you would say it's the river's running one direction right now.
Let me ask you about a couple of other things that Ratcliffe said. One, there's a lot of discussion over Mason Greenwood about whether Mason Greenwood would be brought back. And it's sort of go back to what we were saying about Ten Hag. If you weren't going to bring Mason Greenwood back, you just say no.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
If you are thinking about bringing him back, you give the answer that you just gave. And one thing I will say about Ratcliffe that I feel is that he will make what he believes to be the right decision not one that's swayed by social media.
Gosh.
Whether he wants that baggage or not, bringing him back is another question. Because INEOS will definitely take enormous criticism if they bring him back. And so, but it sounded like to me that that was a door he left open.
Well, I think that there's a couple of things on this, yeah, and obviously it's a bit of a delicate topic. On the one hand, bringing him back, or the impression that you're bringing him back, is a good thing for United's finances if you're going to potentially sell him. Because if you say his career is finished at United at this point in time, him being an asset that is potentially extremely valuable as an academy player, it could be reductive to what you are going to get out of clubs that may come and offer. And there will be clubs that come and offer from Spain, especially where he's doing very well. There's good teams there that would be looking at him. That being said, what you said about not being swayed on social media, I think is certainly apt too, because without making any sort of implication, because I'm really not trying to imply something with this, if United had viewed significantly more evidence than was available to everybody else, like they said they did, including extended versions of recordings and all sorts of things that we don't have to get into and don't want to get into, and they felt that they knew he was, let's call it, innocent for the sake of the word. If that were the case, yeah, I think INEOS would be more likely to bring him back than and not worry about the reaction, because of what you said. There are people who will do things that they believe to be right, rather than by reaction on social media, either direction. They're certainly not going to bring him back because people are calling for him to come back either, if they don't think that he should. And so I think they are going to very likely review everything that has happened, everything that has occurred, the decision-making process and all of it. And I don't think that's something that we're going to have to wait till August to find out about either. I'm pretty sure it's probably already decided, frankly. And then determine, okay, if we're bringing him back, is there a good way to present this that is honest and forthright and doesn't lose goodwill? And is there a willingness on the part of the individuals as well to be participant in that, or not? If there's not a good way to bring him back, or they're not willing to be participant in the right actions that would need to be taken, or their review of it leaves any doubt that he should be a United player, then he won't come back. I would still think it's most likely that he doesn't. I don't want to make an implication as to, the actual events or anything like that at all, because there's no reason to. But yeah, I think that they will. I think for the time being, given he's playing football professionally right now in Spain, you're probably going to think with that it is a possibility of him coming back from INEOS perspective and what they would want out there. And then we'll see. I think something will be said about that, once some of the other decisions are made as well. Either way, they'll probably be putting the feelers out as to selling, just because of the potential asset and financial gain that it'll make too.
I can't be certain about this, but I think the way United handled the whole process was, one, they wanted to kick the can down the road in the hope that new owners would have to deal with it. Two, they didn't want to release him because he's too much of an asset.
Yeah.
Three, there was promises made to Mason Greenwood that this would be handled before the end of the window. So they were trying to find a way to justify bringing him back because he was too much of an asset. And when it got to the point where they had to deal with it because Greenwood's team were like, well, he's got to play. So either he leaves right now, they made a massive mistake because they teased it stupidly. I agree with you. If the evidence exculpates him, then stick to that. But if it doesn't, then don't. But you can't turn around and say the evidence exculpates him, but I'm kicking him out anyway, because you get no credit for that. It's just stupid because you're not being led by values.
Yeah.
So I just feel that they completely mishandled it because they thought it would probably be somebody else's problem by that stage. And And yeah, I mean, obviously it's a sensitive subject to talk about. Other thing is Jim Ratcliffe saying that he prefers to build a new stadium other than renovate Old Trafford. I thought that was a big thing, really, because that was, it is a big decision to build a new
Yeah.
stadium rather than Old Trafford. I think you were saying you preferred that option. United obviously have difficulties with the south stand at the back of the railway. It's a single tier stand, so it's difficult to build out on that. But you're talking about, he talked about the fact that United Stadium really wasn't commensurate with the team of United stature. Same with the training facilities. These are all things that are going to take years to do, obviously, but that is a big decision and change to rebuild to build a new Old Trafford.
It is. It is a big decision, and it's, I think, a long-term thinking decision. It's really tough, obviously, because but again, I think that even I think we'll see some consistency with INEOS and being led by certain values. And if you're talking about, like, let's say you remove all emotion from the equation,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you say our priority is football, winning matches, and building the biggest, most successful club in the world, then I think that answers your question as to what the right decision is for them. And I think that that is how they're going to view things. I mean, these are business people at the end of the day, and you do kind of have to leave that emotion at the door, because it's dollars and cents. And even when you're not talking about money in specific, it's still dollars and cents. It's it's a very logical approach to things that they're going to take, and a very and it's going to be purely logic and data driven, in the way that they make these decisions. They have done, as a business, massive amounts of tear downs, rebuild things, of plants, of facilities, of all sorts of stuff over the years that have nothing to do with football, and it's always dollars and cents. Um, and I think that they've just looked at it and said, yeah, I mean, look at what Madrid has done with theirs. Look at what you can do. It's the best option. The Wembley of the North, like you said, holding events, things like that, all of that there. As far as I know, even before this bidding process was even close to complete, way early on, they had been exploring potential commercial partners for things like this in Asia, the Middle East, and elsewhere. To say, across the world, really, to say, you know, there's a lot of opportunities when you build a stadium that can house other events, other things, all of that. In addition, you open the door to a lot bigger pool of commercial enterprise rather than just diluting what you already have. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
so many sponsorships you can put on a United shirt, or
Yeah.
on the training ground, but you start to expand the stadium, start to increase what you have. I mean, you look at how, like, F1 is doing that thing with Wembley, right? Where they're having like a track outside or something like that too. I mean, the possibilities become rather large in terms of the types of deals and things that you can work out once you have a facility that can
Yeah.
accommodate that. And so I think it raises the ceiling on income, on revenue, on all of that significantly more than just the number of seats in the venue.
What I would say is, I do side with people who push back on the fact that it should be
Yeah,
taxpayer funded. I understand City, I understand West Ham, I understand all that, but I still think football clubs should pay for their own stadiums. It'd be interesting to see how this does get financed. Let me ask you a question. I was thinking about this.
yeah.
So more or less since this whole INEOS thing has been announced, if you go back to INEOS's bid statement, allegedly pissed the Glazers off because they said they were going to put Manchester back in Manchester and all that. Well, they've more or less been repeating that parlance since they've had to take over, where football is going to be the number one priority again at the club, where, the environment hasn't been there, where, the stadium's falling apart. How do you think the Glazers are reacting to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you take, obviously, the announcement, which occurred, of course, alongside statements from the Glazers as well, right? In the written thing, very brief ones,
Mhm.
of course. Um, their view on it, I don't think they particularly care whether anyone else shares their view on it or not. But I think their view on it now is, that's our guy. So what he's doing, we're doing. What he's
Mm.
fixing, we're fixing. I think that's the way they'll view it. I think that's the way that it'll be rationalized to them. And I think it's kind of that simple. They're not on opposing, and to be fair, it has to be this way, right? They're not on opposing teams anymore. Sir Jim is not their opposition. They're teammates now. It is what it is. That's how you get things done in the world a bit. And that is what is the view of it now. They're teammates. And so, if you have a coach talking about your team and saying it's shit, they're playing like shit, their style is shit, their performances are shit, that's no good. But if that guy's your coach and he's talking about how we're going to play better, we're going to improve the style, we're going to improve all of this, you're okay with it. You're a bit better.
It
And I think
depends.
that's the way they're going to view it.
Everything these guys have been doing for the last few years is nowhere near good enough. I don't know. I mean, it's not specific criticism; it's generic, so it's not leveled at one individual particularly. But to me, it's very thinly veiled dig
Of
at
course.
leaders, But
let's be real. You know this, and I know this too. The Glazers' perspective has been many times that it's someone else's fault. That they gave Ed Woodward enough power to do things the way that it should have been done right, and that he was responsible for a lot of what happened that was poor. We know that that's how they view it.
But I don't believe. I mean, to me, that's totally unfair because
I think it is too.
Anything without their permission.
No.
No, I agree with you. I just think, I mean, I'm not defending Ed here, but obviously he was doing the job he was asked to do.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just saying they believed that, even though they held him with a leash,
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine when Woodward working for Jim Ratcliffe? He wouldn't last 5 minutes in that position because he's not qualified for that position. That's the part that I don't understand is they knew that he wasn't qualified. So why did they turn around and do this in 2015 when it was blatantly obvious that this is what needed to happen? All these changes could have been implemented at such minimal cost, because certainly nothing compared to what they threw away by not making these changes. Some other news. I put something out there the other day about Jadon Sancho. And he said, I really hope that Jadon Sancho finds his potential, realizes his potential. I understand people feel differently about this. I'm not, what Jadon did at Manchester United is definitely deserves criticism. But I said, I just can't emotionally invest in his failure. I don't like seeing that happen to anyone. He had another really poor game at the weekend. Was dragged off after 75 minutes in a 3-2 loss to Hoffenheim. Some in the German media said he was the worst player on the pitch. He has no goals, no assists in his last 5 games. Got an assist in the first game that he played. But Sancho really seems to be struggling. I really worry about him, because if he can't revitalize himself in Dortmund, where does it happen?
Yeah, it's a concern. And I want to go back to the Jim Ratcliffe's comment on environments, right? It's kind of sad to see it, and it's not absolving him of the responsibility for the things that he's responsible for. But there's no need to revise history. Jadon Sancho is one of the best players in the world when we bought him. I think he was one of maybe 3 players in history with the kind of numbers he had at his age. 40 goals and assists, multiple seasons by the time he was like 19, right? In Champions League too. We're not just talking about the German league, which
if you saw Sancho
deceptive, but
if you saw that Sancho with Dortmund today, you'd want him.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You'd say, whatever it takes, bring him back and let's have this guy, right? 2.5 years, realized 2.5 years at United during a time, when is probably particularly crucial for a player to really continue to develop into what they need to be. 2.5 years. And you can't really remember him playing football for Manchester United. You had, obviously, the first season he came in, there was the Euros, obviously. And I'm led to believe that that situation was really bad for him and Marcus Rashford over the following season, something they really struggled with.
Oh, that's definitely well. The way they treated by the club, but they felt Saka was treated a lot better than the way Rashford and Sancho were treated upon return, where they felt that there was no one at the club who really defended them.
Yeah, and this is what you talk about environments that you end up feeling isolated, and it's not oh poor you and all of that, but these are young kids who dealt with enormous criticism, racism, all sorts of things following that.
Yeah.
And I don't think either of them, frankly, have ever truly put that to rest. The things that have happened to that, even to this day. But then obviously the team fell apart in the same season. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was sacked. You go through Ralph Rangnick. Wasn't particularly a good environment at United at all during that period of time. You have issues last season, going away for months, all of it, coming to say there has not been a good environment at United for a long time. And it is a fact we've all seen many, many times that very often the longer a player stays at United, the worse they get. And the worse things get for them. Like we've said, there's very few who've left United and gone on to do better. It's in many instances there, things have fallen to a point that is, no longer a good scene for them. And that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. And I think that it would be wrong to say that United and the state of things at United hasn't been a contributing factor to that. Certainly. But, again, it doesn't absolve him of the things that are there, but it is a shame because that is not the same footballer that there was 2.5 years ago at this point in time. And he's still young and still has time to recover that and get it back. And he's going to have to fix some things, of course, himself to do that. But it is a shame. And for me, it's more worrisome. I'm not so worried about it anymore that those kind of things would continue to happen. But it is worrisome. You look at the players at United, Kobbie Mainoo, Alejandro Garnacho, these young players who are particularly exciting, Rasmus Højlund, that right now they're energetic, they're aggressive, they have everything you want in a player. And in the environment, the way it's been at United, I bet 2 years from now, they'll all look like the players everybody wants sold. And that's one of the main things that I think, when you talk about environments, needs to change, because it's not just that the next manager or Erik Ten Hag would have no chance in the environment the way that it's been, but neither will the players, neither will anybody we bring in, neither will any young people we sign will succeed in this environment without the changes that are there.
But what about Ross Barkley? Will he thrive in that environment?
I think Ross Barkley would do great. He's in a no, that was a funny one. I actually quite like Ross Barkley. He's had a bit of an interesting career path.
Well, do you think there's anything in it?
No, not particularly, because I don't think that Dave Brailsford is signing players for Manchester United. I think Sir Jim made that pretty clear too, that they're not going to be the ones making that decision. So, did Dan Ashworth try to bring Ross Barkley to Newcastle? I don't think he did. I don't think that Dan Ashworth would be interested in signing him. I don't think Omar Barada would be interested in signing him. So I don't particularly think that there's anything in that beyond a cursory, hey, we know he's a good guy. We know he's a good teammate. We know he's somebody that be a positive influence on the club. But beyond that, does he fit what United want to bring in? Probably not.
Okay, last 2 points. Next time we record, we'll know if United are still in the FA Cup or not, and we'll know the result of the derby. United play Forest, of course, in midweek. Very, very tough enough game. This is where I feel like if they were to get knocked out of the cup and lose against City, I think that's it for Ten Hag. Tell me, what do you see in the next 2 games?
Yeah, obviously the Forest game is like. That one you can't. I mean, City, you not saying you can lose City. It's a tough situation where we're at the moment, because it's not like you can lose. You're not expected to beat City, but you absolutely have to beat Forest. You absolutely have to beat Forest. You won't get much credit for beating them, but you still have to do it. And United have to do it.
I agree with both those statements, but if United lose to City by being completely outclassed, tactically outclassed, there's no excuse for them. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You put in a performance where you give 100%, where you don't let yourself down, where you play for the badge, you play for the fans.
Yes.
They've thrown in the towel so many times against Man City. I can take going there and losing 1-0, 2-1, whatever, where United put in a performance where there's nothing between the two teams. What I can't take is if United go out there and we're 3-4-0 down by half time. I can't. I'm done with it,
I
man.
know.
I can't take
Well,
any more.
I agree with that. It's like if you were to take this week and say after these next two games, if you'd have to beat Forest pretty decently. I mean, not necessarily by multiple goals, but have a good game, and beat Forest. And you'd have to go to City, and you don't have to win necessarily. A draw would be great.
Totally.
If you lost in a really tight game,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
will go away from it and say, all right, they did what they were supposed to with it. I don't know how to see it. I mean, we saw that they went away to Liverpool not long ago and did well getting that draw. Liverpool were pretty bad that day at the
Mm-hmm.
same time,
Well,
right? But United also could have easily scored a couple goals as well, I think, in the alternative. I don't mind if, I said it before that game. Go in, put 11 men behind the ball and play counterattacking football and grind it out, which is what they did. And I think that it was a positive. And I don't think that Ten Hag even got any criticism aside from Virgil van Dijk whining about it in the
I don't think
press
you need to get away
conference.
with that at City. I think Holland would eventually punish
They
them.
can't. That's the issue. The City are way better at breaking that down. So you can't quite do that. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer got some really good results against City by kind of taking it to them a bit more. Uh, it's a conundrum. You have to be brave against City. You can't, what we're doing isn't working, but you can't settle back and sit because they will pick you apart and score. We're not going to be able to do that against them. So I don't know what to say. I just I hope they're up for it, and I hope that they do the best that they can with it. But I think that there is potential that this is a decisive week for a number of reasons.
One of the things that can't happen is if United lose to Forest and then someone like Elanga scores the winner, because it's going to look terrible for Ten Hag. Right? I mean, it's just going to be, you kept Anthony, and this kid, 15 million, who came through your academy, just knocked you out of the FA Cup. Like, that type of storyline Ten Hag cannot have, because that is something that I think, INEOS would be, but when you talk about their irritation over recruitment and the fact that they think it's been mismanaged with not just players that have come in, but players that have gone out. I mean, that is something where I would be sitting there going, you sold this kid and you brought in a guy at 85 million that would he come on the 99th minute against Fulham. I mean, that's, to me, really telling.
Yeah.
Going, this looks really bad.
He's got 12 goals and assists in the Premier League, Anthony Elanga, this season.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't have sold him. I'm not saying, but the problem isn't the decision that you sold him, it's who you sold him for. That just looks really bad judgment.
Yeah.
When you're sitting there going, we're up against the wall here with the FFP. We're not, and we're sitting here with an 85 million pound winger on the bench that doesn't play because he isn't good enough. And he looks so far off it. And I don't want to keep singling him out. I just think it is a really big issue for Ten Hag in the evaluation of, okay, where has he succeeded and where has he failed? The Onana one isn't even that much of a conversation anymore. It's this glaring Anthony issue where it's like, hey, and it's and I don't know what the situation is with Casemiro. Obviously, he came off injured with his head, but I look at that United team. I mean, one of the things that stands out to me from that Forest game was right before the game when Morgan Gibbs-White was saying, look at their faces, they don't want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was damning, and the fact that United weren't offended at that, the players weren't offended at that. I mean, they owe United a performance there. And I don't know. I think this is a really telling week on Erik ten Hag's future. And nothing would please me more than to be sitting here next Monday talking about 2 victories. But I'd be amazed what happens. But all right, mate, you got anything else?
No, that's it. I think the only other thing to just mention on this is obviously, United INEOS are still working through those recruitment of individuals aside from Dan Ashworth, which they're still addressing. Jason Wilcox, but then it sounds like they're likely to be bringing in somebody else in addition to that. At one point, it sounded like Julian Ward was ruled out, but it seems like some people are kind of getting the idea that maybe there is something in that too. And it's certainly a lot of people. But the only interesting thing I want to highlight about it, just in terms of how INEOS think about things too, is that it seems like Jason Wilcox, who Omar Barada would be familiar with, of course, from Manchester City, would be in a role in which he's sort of overseeing coaching and the performance side of things, which of course lends a question, one, to Darren Fletcher and what his future is at the club, but two, the way that they look at things. Somebody who is not the coach overseeing the coach, and I think that continues to impress upon this point of how they view the manager, and
I
that the
think they're
managers.
looking it's Matt Hargreaves too.
Yeah, yes, certainly. I think that's somebody who would probably move on, and that it's you do what we want, from the coach too, from the manager too. It's not the other way around. It's the decision comes down, and you adjust to it, and you conform to that, and you answer to that, or we get somebody who does particularly. But a lot of overhauls coming now, and obviously, I think now that they are in officially, fully, totally, legally, and from every aspect where they don't have to do things, in any sort of shady manner, I think they'll be moving really fast through the next month or so, especially on appointments and the decisions like we've talked about, to get as much of this in place as possible, because again, the next season starts in March. That's when everybody's preparing and making their final calls for summer and for next year now. So we're kind of on the precipice of it, even though there's so many questions left to be answered.
We shall see a lot happening, and at least it's happening at a rapid pace. So at least we're getting, whether, even if it's the wrong decision, there's no more indecision. There's decisiveness, where it's like, okay, you know what, we won't get every decision right, but there's decisiveness, and you feel like these decisions are motivated by all the right factors. All right, folks, we'll go ahead and leave it there. Thanks to all of you for downloading the podcast, for downloading the wrong podcast last week too. I'll have to label these to make these a little bit more simple, so that I don't upload the wrong one. But thanks for all of you who download the show, who listen to the show, who get in touch with us each week, let us know that you do, and who share it, retweet it. It's always very much appreciated. We will be back again next week. Hope you're all physically and mentally well. Take it easy, folks. See you later, man.
Thank you. See you all.